just before we head into our panel discussion, I do think it would be useful for all of us here present to know a little bit more about where we are all situated in our climate journey within our individual companies, but so we can know this collectively. So there's two little Zoom questions that are going to pop up, just asking if, to your knowledge, your company has or has not made a carbon accounting of their greenhouse gas emissions, and how many companies have set science-based targets. So while we're waiting for everyone to answer, and thank you very much, let me start things off by asking, oh, here we go. Right, so we are about 62% have measured have taken a carbon accounting. That's really, really big actually compared to kind of an average. 10% of people don't really know. I can understand that. When we get to science-based targets, it's a little tougher. My company is on that second part of the journey. We did our first carbon accounting last year, and now we're heading into target setting. So thank you for sharing that. And on that note, speaking of, we have our first panelist, Edouard, who's going to answer the following question. To accelerate action globally, what should be the focus areas for business and the business world in the next 2 to 3 years? Of course, number one for every company is reducing emissions in an accountable way. And on a collective level, is there another focus we should have? Could it be about policy advocacy, more industry collaboration, financing, or something else? Thank you, Edouard.
Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for the invitation. And on my side, I would say that for companies, it's now really important to work on climate action and to develop low carbon strategy and, of course, associated transition plan or action plan in order to be sure that the commitments, the objective in terms of the reduction of GHG emission will be achieved. And to provide some elements to your answer, industry collaboration is key for me. There are a lot of benefits to work collectively on these topics. For example, for a company, you can make progress individually, but also collectively, thanks to a collective approach. You can also discuss with other companies inside your sector or in other sectors to make progress and to thanks collective sessions. And it's also a great opportunity to enhance the network thanks to a collective approach. And in order to provide tools, methods and tools to work on low carbon transition and low carbon strategy, we decided in ADEME with our colleague in CDP to develop the ACT initiative. To provide a concrete example, what is the ACT initiative? ACT initiative means assessing low carbon transition. So it's an international initiative which is at the Global Climate Action Agenda supported by the UNFCCC. And the objective is to provide a climate accountability framework to assess company decarbonization strategy and transition plan regarding the well below 2 degrees objective. It's also a methodology and tool to define and implement such strategy and action plans. So regarding the previous question, the objective is to provide tools and methodology after a GHG inventory. Maybe if we can go to the slide, the next slide, if you don't mind. Thanks a lot. But before working on low carbon strategy, we need to define what is a low carbon strategy. And for the ACT initiative, this kind of strategy has 9 components. The first component of a strategy is to have target in terms of GHG emission reduction, and that to be sure that targets are aligned with low carbon pathways. The second big domain of for a climate strategy is the actions, the action plan. And so it's important also to focus on material investment and the investment on assets in order to reduce effectively the GHG emission. It's also important to consider R&D expenditure in low carbon transition. It's also important to work on the GHG performance of the sold product. It's also important to manage the low carbon transition internally, to work with supplier and with client collectively to reduce GHG emission. It's also important to engage publicly on this topic and to think about new business model that will allow the company to be profitable in a low carbon economy. So that's our definition of a low carbon strategy. And we develop inside the ACT initiative 2 approaches. The first one is ACT step by step. The idea is to develop this strategy and the associated transition plan, and after to implement it. And this is for early stage companies. For example, after a GHG inventory, you can go to ACT step-by-step approach. And it's a really quite usual approach. It's a 5-step approach focusing on initial diagnosis in order to assess the maturity of the company, to work on challenges and issues for the company, to develop the vision in terms of low carbon strategy, to develop the strategy and the associated objectives, and to imagine, design, and implement the action plan. So we have for that a toolbox in order to make progress. And the other part of the ACT initiative is ACT assessment. It's for more advanced companies with science-based targets and transition plan. And the objective is now to measure the alignment of the low carbon strategy with the Paris Agreement goals. And at the end, you have a score which is illustrated on this slide. And to provide you a concrete example, in France, it's an international initiative, but in France, we work with B-Lab France in order to collectively implement the ACT step-by-step approach with 10 companies in order, so as you understood, to make progress on the low carbon strategy for these companies and to work on action plans. So it will start this year, the end of this year, and it will be until the end of next year.
Thank you so much for all those explanations, Edouard. I know it's a lot of information to take in, everybody. As we've said in the chat, you will receive the slides after, and there's also website information available about the ACT initiative and more clarity. It's a fantastic thing to do together. Also in the French community last year, we had a first cohort of small companies that did their first carbon assessment together. It can be really motivating to do it again together and to ask each other questions and compare and listen. That really helps because it's very daunting and it's hard to feel alone. Edouard, you said something very interesting in your whole list. It was all about reduction. So the next question I'd like to ask is to Tom, to our second panelist. Thank you very much, about how we're going to ensure some of the commitments that we heard at COP26 and that we hear around us that are set by big, small businesses. What are the accountability mechanisms we need to put in place, and who might be responsible for that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Amsterdam. Great to be able to talk to you and talk to the B Corp community. So I work for Science-Based Targets and want to explain a little bit about, yes, how we can bring accountability and transparency to commitments. What we saw at COP26 was a huge groundswell of corporate commitments to 1.5 degree science-based targets. We have over 1,000 companies now within SBTi that are signed up to 1.5 degree targets, and over 600 that are signed up to set science-based net zero targets. That's all great, but we need thousands more. And we need to go faster and further than we've ever gone before. And really the huge challenge before us is essentially never mind all the other things that were discussed at Glasgow. The hard fact is we need to halve global emissions by 2030. That's in 8 years. And despite all the commitments and the nice words, the best case scenario is probably that global emissions will stay flat until 2030 at best. So the challenge before us is to how can we all collectively, wherever we sit, whatever we do, whoever we work with, go as fast as possible towards halving global emissions by 2030. If we don't, the global carbon budget for 1.5 will be pretty used up by 2030. That's both a scary scenario, but also something that I think is the ultimate motivation. For accountability, it is a huge thing for SBTi. SBTi started in 2015, and just before the Paris Agreement, and it started only with 80 companies, and it was always supposed to be a voluntary initiative showing that companies could set targets and could implement targets and act on targets in line with science. So 5 years in, we've launched last year in 2020 the first progress report, and we've seen that on average companies with science-based targets are decarbonizing roughly 6% a year. So companies are making progress, but essentially, even with the rapid growth of science-based targets, it's not enough companies, it's not enough action. And who should be holding them accountable? Ideally, global government should be holding them accountable. There should be standards out there, there should be standards set, there should be clear alignment around the targets. To be honest, there isn't. And the best example of that is the new trend for net zero targets. Up until very recently, personally, it was a bit of a wild west. Anyone could set a net zero target, anyone could define the net zero target that they wanted. The scopes were all different. What was included, what was not. You had everything from well-meaning, good, concrete net zero targets, which were trying to tackle the problem, right through to global oil majors just saying, we consider 2050 net zero targets fine if we don't count all the stuff that we sell to everyone. That's okay. Or utilities saying it'll be okay, we offset, or my favorite, which is the airline industry saying we'll be fine with 50% of offsets by 2050. So in that background, science-based targets launched in October just before COP, so probably very few people have seen it, the new science-based net zero standard, and that is essentially the first global standard for companies to define how you should set net zero targets. What's most important, absolute emissions reductions, above all else, getting as close to near zero as you can get as a company, 90 to 95% reduction for companies before 2050. To be honest, ideally, science-based targets shouldn't be the ones who have to set the global net zero standard, but that's the world we live in, and it's out now for companies. We need it also for all other non-state actors and for countries as well. It's no good setting a Australia net zero target when you say it'll all be fine when we get to net zero at 2049. That's not the accountability that we need. So essentially, what Edouard talked about, right now the accountability gap is filled a little bit by voluntary organizations like Carbon Disclosure Project, like Science-Based Targets. It's far from perfect. It's voluntary, bottom-up organization, but it is one of the few ways to hold particularly corporate commitments to account. And also through Science-Based Targets, we also started off in 2015 with 2-degree targets. 2-degree targets were quite rapidly seen as not ambitious enough. They're well below 2-degree targets. When the IPCC report came out in 2018, there was a decision we should essentially push for only 1.5-degree targets from July 2022, only 1.5 degree targets will be allowed in science-based targets. So continuing to raise that bar and also showing our companies reacting to that and implementing their science-based targets. Science-based targets are great for individual companies, but really we need to collaborate together to go further with suppliers, further in specific sectors. We've made good progress in Northern Europe. In the US, we still have a lot more work in Asia, where a lot of products are manufactured. A lot of the coal use is concentrated, and also in regions like Latin America, Africa, definitely more focus there. So the accountability is starting, and it's definitely needs to be ramped up and become more comprehensive. And that's part of the detailed discussions we're happening in Glasgow. How can we do that on a global level?
Thank you so much, Tom. I really think we heard loud and clear that any serious low carbon transition plan, as also Edward pointed out, begins with reduction all the way down to 90%. And I think it feels very daunting to a lot of us, because yes, we're doing this very incrementally. We're starting with 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, and we got to make 50% in a couple of years. And it's going to take all of us and all of our brain power and all of our ingenuity and all of the fantastic systems that Charlie Leadbeater were talking about to bring us to that place, because there seems to be no magic bullet. And that reduction, as hard as it is to really envision, is essential to what we're doing. So that's a fantastic message. In the 2 minutes that are left, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who's listening to us, and really encourage you to look at the resources that Tom and Edward shared, because it's heavy and we only had a small time for this session. So really go check them out. Talk with other B Corps in your community, if you have a climate collective in your country, please get involved in it. If you get in the global climate collective, it's really time to start moving together, because it can really completely freak you out when you feel all alone. So let's be together. One last question to ask you guys about what you think collectively are the most important things we can do to work on the climate challenge. Okay, yes. Carbon accounting, there we go, and setting science-based targets. This challenge is planetary. It is not individual. We have to reach it all together across the world. And with that, I'll show you just one last little kind of bonus slide. If you can flip over to that one, Helena. If the last few years we were talking about climate denial, as Gonzalo pointed out, we've now accepted the science, and we might be at a little risk for something called climate delay. So if you don't already know it, I really highly suggest that you check out the report called Discourses of Climate Delay, led by a man named William Lamb, who's a researcher in Berlin, and illustrated by a French artist named Léonard Cheminot. It's available in many different languages. Might take also a little bit of lightness into this whole thing for a moment. We can have a moment of whew, but also to keep ourselves aware and be able to identify what might be climate delay, so that we don't delay, so that we all move forward. Thank you all for participating with us in this session.